Folk traditions regarding spirits fill a gap in our Western understanding of spirituality and the supernatural. The sterile materialism of the modern age describes a spirit-less world, but even the medieval and Renaissance periods held the physical or visible world mostly separate from the numinous one. This was inherited from Neoplatonism, which is to say, a top-down hierarchical view of spirit in which divinity is the peak of pure transcendental awareness, the Godhead, if you will, and everything below God is progressively more coarse and unrefined. Christianity extended this idea by establishing a rank and file of demons and demon kings, angels and archangels, and so on, which influenced the grimoire tradition to treat spirits as dangerously powerful beings which must be wrangled into submission through evocation into crystals and so on, or otherwise avoided through piety and prayer. Pagan traditions, far more ancient than Christian ones, treat spirits quite differently, and generally speaking, reverently. Even fearsome spirits are propitiated and appeased, especially those, precisely because it is presumed that we share the earth with them rather than exist in completely different dimensions. If you look back far enough in any ancient tradition, you'll find rites and practices which demonstrate that humans originally saw reality as divided into three connected parts: sky, earth, and underworld. And the underworld wasn't hell in some other dimension. It is literally under the earth, as in the ground. The underworld is where the dead go, because everything, when it dies and decays, returns to the earth as dirt. And sky wasn't heaven, it was just the sky, literally the thing above our heads, as if it were a place that could be occupied by its own kind of residence, like aerial spirits. In this original cosmology, earth isn't ruled by demons, angels, and God Almighty. She is occupied by spirits, human, animal, plant, and otherwise, and tended to by the Great Spirit, or the universe, if you like. Because we share the earth with spirits, we obviously have to be aware of them and to maintain good relations with them, or else we'll deal with their retribution. Modern life in the West has made it easy to overlook these traditions because we explain away all of our misfortune with updated language that doesn't consider spiritual concerns to be valid. Yet, we regularly experience unexpected misfortunes and delays, and I suspect that if our ancient counterparts encountered the kind of bad luck that seems commonplace today, it would have caused them a great deal more distress. See, we've forgotten what it's like to enjoy effortless good fortune because we've forgotten to prioritize our spiritual responsibilities with simple practices like showing gratitude by leaving offerings for local spirits. This sort of practice is almost universally commonplace in Asia and in rural areas around the world where folk traditions are still practiced and respected. Who knows what life might be like if we started paying attention to our ancient spiritual contracts or forging new ones with the spirits of the places where we live. There are plenty of old folk traditions that can inform a modern reconstructed practice. There are also living traditions that can be tapped into respectfully if you're living in a place still rich with indigenous culture. For us, my wife and I, on our journey to build jungle sanctuary in the Riviera Maya, we don't really see this as a choice. The area where we're building has living legends like these, with supernatural events taking place in the stories that are only a few years old. And where we're going to be building is totally undeveloped. It's still a pretty wild bit of jungle right now. So urbanization has not yet driven away or domesticated its wild, feral spirits. They are active, mischievous, and protective of their jungle. Building in the jungle without following proper protocols would offend them and might endanger our project or ourselves. There's a local story from only a few years ago when the bridge to the Cancun airport over the Cancun to Tulum highway was first constructed that tells of how the project endured numerous setbacks and unusual delays, like bad batches of concrete or workers coming to the site in the morning only to find all the rebar they'd set the previous day was bent out of place and other such inexplicable frustrations. Workers on the project were mostly locals of Mayan descent, so they informed their superiors that these misfortunes were probably being caused by the local elves or goblins known as the Alush. These creatures, they explained, were displeased by the construction, but could be appeased with gifts of corn, honey, and the construction of a miniature house for the Alush. And like the spirit house traditions in Thailand, Cambodia, and other places in the Far East, the houses are actually more like fancy altars, or places of honor, than places of residence. A large Alush house was erected prominently where the new bridge's overpass was being constructed, and local Mayan shamans dedicated the house and invited in the Alush with traditional offerings and prayers. After this ceremony, the story goes, the project was allowed to proceed without any further delays and hasn't had any issues since, up until the bridge was replaced just this year. And sadly, the new project did not include an updated house for the Alush and is already experiencing accidents and delays. We never seem to learn our lessons. In my own experience, I've found that working with the local spirits of place is very important, but it's also not exactly straightforward. Modern humans are unaccustomed to engaging with wild, feral spirits, but that's what we've encountered out here in the jungle. It's not that they're unfamiliar with people, but they're deeply ambivalent and initially distrustful. People have occupied these forests for thousands of years, but construction typically leads to deforestation, and the Yucatan really doesn't like that. So the spirits resist the kind of construction which leads to clearing the jungle as best they can. It's already hard to build in the jungle, and modernity is quickly eroded by the abrasive combination of salty sea air, tropical humidity, and the ever-present heavy mineral content in the water. The way that modern homes are built is somewhat incompatible with jungle life, and everything that traps moisture molds or breeds mosquitoes. Everything that can rust will, and all the while, outside your house, the jungle is slowly creeping back in around all the edges, covetous of every unclaimed beam of sunlight. If you stand still long enough, the jungle will grow around you and swallow you up. Humans are not in charge in this environment, and we knew when we set out to build in the jungle that we'd need the blessing and the support of the local spirits of place before we could begin our project, or even purchase our land. I've talked before about protocols for establishing contact with spirits of place in prior episodes, but right now what I want to talk about is what happens after you've established contact, but before construction begins. Claude Lecateau, in his excellent books, Demons and Spirits of the Land, and the Tradition of Household Spirits, discusses the conditions under which you can safely claim and construct on wild land, and there are a number of important protocols to follow. Within those books, he paints a picture of a process of land acquisition and the domestication of its spirits of place as guardians over the home or homestead, in addition to the natural environment that surrounds it. Lecateau does not describe the creation of little houses for spirits in either of these two books, but he does describe at length the importance of dedicating space and giving gifts to appease any spirits that you might disturb in the process of building or moving into your home. He also describes a means of taming or domesticating these spirits to convert them into the guardians of your home and its residents. And this suggests something very interesting, that there are different levels of relationship with local spirits that afford you different statuses. And this certainly tracks with my own personal experience. At first, while getting to know the spirits of place, we simply visited a sacred-feeling location on the land and left offerings of traditional food and gifts. Over time, this relationship deepened, and we were eventually given permission to build through omens and divination and so on. Now that we're getting close to actually starting construction, it's time for us to build a home for the spirits. Building a home for them before building one for ourselves is just good policy. Join me as I dig into fascinating stories from around the world to understand the role of spirit houses, Alush houses, and other similar traditions, and attempt to reconstruct a working tradition for our own use in episode 18, A Home for Spirits, which starts in just a moment. Welcome to the 18th episode of the Postmugglism podcast, the podcast about magic in the postmodern age, practical enchantment for interesting times. I'm your host, Nate, aka Postmugglism. Thanks for tuning in and for spending this time with me. The last couple of episodes felt a little heavy, so I thought I'd head in a lighter direction next and spend this episode discussing a fascinating tradition that spans both continents and thousands of years of practice: building homes for spirits. The term spirit houses refers to a particular tradition out of the Far East where ornate homes are built, mostly by professionals these days, to house the guardian spirits of a particular dwelling and to provide a place to leave offerings and send prayers. But the same basic tradition is kept a world away in the Americas, and close parallels mirror this practice throughout Europe in fairy customs. Most people are probably aware of the fairy houses of Ireland and Scotland, and maybe even of the Nordic Alv or elf houses, which are not really that different from the various spirit house traditions of the East. But less well known are the goblins of the Mayan jungle, called the Alush, which inhabit old trees, cenotes, and other special locations. Like the fairies of Europe, they are mischievous and capricious, but can be appeased and propitiated for healthy crops, a healthy family, to discover secrets of the land, and so on. Working with them, like working with any fae, is tricky business. In my own experience, they are neither aggressive nor unpleasant, but they are reclusive and reserved. After months of offerings and time spent in the jungle, we've finally developed a working relationship that has produced beneficial results, but with each new phase of our journey, the plot thickens, and we have new obligations and new forms of ceremony to explore with them. In this episode, I'm doing my own research for the Alush house that we'll be building soon out on our lot in the jungle, reconstructing an ancient practice to expand our relationship with the spirits of our future home. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts so that you get notified when I publish new bi-weekly episodes. You can also find this podcast on YouTube if you like making awkward eye contact with me throughout the show. And for more articles, videos, and my monthly lunar mansion guides and more, check out my website at www.postmugglism.com. If you subscribe to my email newsletter there on my site, you'll get notified whenever I publish something new, regardless of what platform it's on. Plus, subscribers get dibs on any new talismans that we're releasing or other special offerings from our business, The Sacred Serpent. And that website is www.sacredserpent.co. Before I get back to the episode at hand and talking about spirit houses from around the world, please allow me to share with you a couple of new offerings. I recently decided to expand my services at the Sacred Serpent from just offering energy healing sessions to now including tarot readings and magical consultations, which are basically like 30-minute long Ask Me Anythings. I love tarot and have relied on my cartomancy skills to navigate our adventurous life's twists and turns with great success. And the number of times I've been called upon to read cards for friends and energy healing clients has been stacking up. So I decided that it finally made sense to offer this as part of my practice. When I read tarot, it's not one big complicated spread. It's usually a lot of smaller readings that help you attack a problem or go fishing for an answer in a variety of different ways. And then a few more readings just to make sure that the answer that you received is consistent and clear. I'm a skeptical and practical tarot reader. You won't get fluffy, hard to understand answers from me. I'll read for you the way I read for myself, asking hard questions to get actionable answers. So if you're faced with some decisions, or you just have some important questions, I'd love to read for you. At the moment, my rate is $50 for a 45-minute session, and you can get half off your first session with the code FIRSTSESSION, all spelled out. Thanks for allowing me to promote that. Now let's get on with this episode, A Home for Spirits. No one builds in the Mayan jungle without first building an Alush house, a spirit house dedicated to the Yucatan's most well-known cryptozoological entities, the dwarves or goblins of the Mayans, called the Alush, and giving them offerings and prayers. To do so would invite danger and potential delays, so even on big commercial and public works projects, this is quietly regarded as good policy. We didn't buy our land in the jungle until we figured out how to make contact with its spirits and ask permission. And we didn't even find the property we eventually purchased until many weeks after we had been regularly leaving offerings at a quiet little crossroads in the jungle community where we were hoping to buy. If you don't know our story already, my wife and I decided, after a bunch of magic and psychedelics, to quit our old careers, sell our house in Dallas, Texas, and move to the Mexican Caribbean to buy untouched jungle land and build ourselves a little tropical homestead and sanctuary. There's a bit more to it. That's kind of the super quick synopsis, but if you're interested in the full story, I cover our escape from the US in episodes 3 and 4, The Great Escape, parts 1 and 2, and the story of how I was called to this place originally in episode 14, Fern Gully Magic, and finally, what the road ahead looks like for us now in episode 15, Sanctuary in Paradise. At the moment, we're waiting on paperwork from the city of Puerto Morelos so that we can begin our construction, and we're hoping that that's in another month or maybe 2. But there's no rushing government process in Mexico, so it's hard to say with any certainty. It'll be soon, we think. As they tell us here all the time, quizás mañana, maybe tomorrow. But when it is finally time to build, the first order of business has to be building a structure for the spirits of our land, who we've been working with for almost 2 years now, and with whom we've made an arrangement for guardianship over our land and its inhabitants, including us. While there are local traditions for building Alush houses, they have been somewhat commercialized in this tourist-centric area of the Caribbean coastline. Every hotel has an Alush house, as do many of the neighborhoods full of expats and vacationers. They probably served a legitimate purpose during construction, but are not regularly tended, and we should imagine the contemporary and sloppy versions of ritual that were applied are no more valid than anything that I might cook up myself. Much better documentation exists for the East Asian traditions of building and keeping spirit houses, so there is value in looking there and elsewhere around the world to see how each culture approaches this practice and then take inspiration from them all. In Cambodia, for example, making spirit houses is something between a commercial venture, a way of life, and a spiritual practice for a dwindling number of authentic artisans. Their clients range from middle-class to wealthy families, often purchasing one house and then replacing it repeatedly over time as they enjoy good fortunes. And that's because, while some people purchase them out of tradition or for aesthetic value, most who acquire a spirit house seek to gain favors from the spirits contracted as guardians. Cambodian spirit houses come in a variety of styles and serve different categories of spirits. The flat-topped houses are designed to hold the photos of dead relatives or ancestors or the Buddha, while the peaked roof style, which resembles a temple or castle, are designed to attract spirits of place. Some local sources date the practice to the 12th century under the first Buddhist king of the Khmer, but others insist that these practices are holdovers from earlier animist folk traditions. And this is the more credible and less political version of the story, in my opinion. The belief in nature spirits tends to be one of our oldest beliefs across the globe, and is typically integrated or replaced by more formal religious beliefs that develop later in attempts to consolidate their divine authority. These templed spirit houses are traditionally painted contrasting dark colors and gold because Cambodia is referred to as the land of gold in their legends, and they live in the doorways of family homes. Spirits are invited into them through prayer and then asked for favors such as protection, prosperity, and so on through offerings. It's commonly thought that they bring good fortune, and houses are often upgraded as a family's luck improves and they can afford newer, more ornate spirit houses. This concept of rewarding spirits and improving their standing as their hosts' fortunes improve is potentially very important and helps to explain why a spirit house is needed in the first place. If you get to build a nice home, why shouldn't the spirits have one as well? Historians link the Far Eastern practice of building spirit houses across the region, even to more isolated locations like the Philippines, despite minor differences in style, coloring, and so on. The common thread is an ancient practice of denoting certain special places, sacred, like with the marking of an old tree with a pile of stones, for example, which evolved over time into much more complex and ornate forms. Still, the similarities between the black and gold Cambodian spirit houses that can be seen in Phnom Penh and the wooden and multicolored spirit houses of Thailand, or the white and gold motif of the spirit houses of Malai, different as they appear, are unmistakable and clearly indicate a shared heritage. In their original rural context, those first simple houses were merely markers at sacred sites nature spirits already inhabited, in exactly the same way that my wife and I encountered our sacred tree and instinctively knew to engage with the local spirits in that special place. Community spirit houses, as in for the neighborhood, are also traditionally kept in rural environments and are referred to as nikta. There is a legend in some places in Cambodia that nikta was actually the name of the first man to domesticate the wilds of that country into farmland, an act of bravery because it would offend the local spirits, and thus nikta would have been the first to discover the importance of building spirit houses. Nikta also means grandfather, suggesting a conflation of the traditions of venerating ancestors and nature spirits. Either way, the practice emphasizes the importance of recognizing the more than human inhabitants of wild places when you wish to occupy their space and coexist with them. It is only possible to move into a wild place if you first work out an arrangement with its spirits and then provide them with honors and comforts in proportion to the level that your own family enjoys. Urbanization and modernization each play roles in updating spiritual traditions, for better or worse, and this helps to confuse the already obscured histories of folk traditions as they emerge in modern contexts. In Thailand, for example, one of the best offerings to set outside your spirit house is, strangely, strawberry Fanta. The liquid is bright red, and this has led to people theorizing about a connection with blood and animal sacrifices, but given the sweetness of Fanta, it seems like a strange conclusion to draw. Either way, bright red liquids are preferred, and this has been the case for a long time, though no one really remembers why. Separating the modern practice from its indigenous roots is easier said than done, and it can be quite difficult to sort out which parts of the ritual are substantive. As spirit house traditions were carried into urban environments, a lot of the original context was lost or evolved into new traditions without the guardrails of spiritual maturity. Now they are often little more than aesthetic practices and good luck charms, so it's important to peel away the bits of the practice adopted in modern times and attempt to understand its original context and purpose, or at least to understand it in a simpler, rudimentary context at first. To understand why spirit house traditions exist in the first place and what purpose they serve in animist cosmologies, let's return to Claude Lecoteau in his book The Tradition of Household Spirits, Ancestral Lore and Practices. He says, a house is much more than a building. It is a microcosm, a living being with a body and a soul. It speaks even if its language is only creaking and cracking noises for the profane. If uncared for, it can also grow old and die. Once abandoned, it crumbles away, leaving its skeleton visible to all. This view of a house as both a living being and a microcosm is a profound shift from the home is where you hang your hat modern perspective. First, it's useful to see yourself as a part of the organism that is your home, like an organ within a body. Second, the idea that your home is a microcosm, when we consider as above so below, sort of turns your house into a metaphor for the greater world, and thus a kind of altar. When you look at your own house as a kind of magical landscape through which you can affect the world around you, an altar, it starts to make a lot more sense why spirit houses are also altars. Building a spirit house is creating a microcosm in which you can interact with these spirits and show them appreciation, symbolically or otherwise. By improving the conditions of the spirits, you're contributing to the improvement of your own situation through the magic of metaphor. With that in mind, consider how the process that Lecoteau recommends for ingratiating ourselves with local spirits and seeking their patronage and protection is, in essence, a protocol for right relationship. Lekato's prior works, Demons and Spirits of the Land, and The Hidden History of Elves and Dwarves, introduce us to fairy folk, elementals, and nature spirits of various sorts in legend and historical accounts of the supernatural. In Demons and Spirits of the Land, Lekato paints a clear picture of a series of ritual acts that can be universally employed to establish contact with the spirits of a place and to acquire land from them and gain permission to construct buildings upon the land, without fear of fairy reprisal. In the tradition of household spirits, he takes this further by suggesting that house spirits are often the same spirits that the resident has already established a relationship with, that the genus loci are somehow, at least partially, domesticated through engagement with the resident. He says, I pointed out the difficulty we have in making a clear distinction between the genus loci from the domestic deity, inasmuch as this latter can be a former place spirit that has been tamed or satisfied by the offerings or worship it has been given. The spirit house is just an upgrade from the sacred tree, which is funny to say because in my case it's literally true. So the pattern seems to be sort of essentially correct. From a pile of rocks to an artistic creation, a spirit house is really just a fancy altar. Its purpose is to mark, in space and in spiritual metaphor, the location at which you plan to commune with the resident spirits. Therefore, it also makes sense to have multiple locations for different types of spirits. It is a spirit house, after all, not a spirit condo. When it comes to offerings, it is generally best practice to go with natural items like fruits, food, desserts, flowers, seeds, and so on. But you can also use things that were traditionally associated with the spirit or favored by the spirit in life, in the case of a spirit house for ancestors. In the jungle, the traditional offerings for the Alush are corn and honey because of the original culture's dependence on the many varieties of maize or corn that they cultivated, and their fondness for the magical healing honey of the stingerless Meliapona bees, whom the Mayans are said to have kept on the sides of their homes. But, to be fair, I've also given offerings of fruit, eggs, bread, seeds, beans, flowers, and other materials that I can procure locally. Initially, when looking at undeveloped and undisturbed land, communication with its spirits is limited to establishing contact, building a relationship, and acquiring their blessing to purchase the property and build on it. But once properly housed, fed, and honored, though, local spirits are more likely to be helpful and can be asked for all kinds of favors. Legends say that your household spirits can bring prosperity in the form of good business opportunities, protect your family from harm and from thieves, and protect your harvest and your animals. In my own experience, I've already been connected with good people who can help us in our project, given a wealth of inspired ideas, and shown the location where we're going to build our house, all directly after asking the jungle spirits for their help at various times over the last 2 years. We've been safe, and I've never even cut myself or fallen or had any other kind of mishap, and all of our neighbors like us, as far as we know. While we've experienced delays, nothing bad has happened to us at all. I attribute a lot of the continued success of our project and the easy breezy way it has come together to the dirt sorcery or nature magic that I've been working since the fall of 2020 when I first bought dirt in Tulum, about an hour south of here, and started giving it offerings and sending it my intentions. Keeping up a regular practice of giving offerings and sticking to the terms of any agreements you make with spirits of place is more than a good idea, it's essential. If you stop being grateful to the spirits, you'll find that you're suddenly no longer receiving their favor and its benefits as well. Much like it's difficult to draw a distinction between spirits of place and household or guardian spirits once a contract is in place between humans and the local spirits, it's equally difficult to say just what kind of spirits we mean when we say spirits of place. Honestly, it really just means spirits which hang out around a place. When domesticating wild land, it's reasonable, though not guaranteed, that the spirits that you'll encounter are nature spirits, elementals, fae, or whatever you want to imagine them as. But in more lived-in areas, you're just as likely to encounter the dead, or an old house spirit, etc. In practice, this doesn't matter much. If the spirit is hanging around the place and willing to watch your back, do you favors, and so on, then it's probably a good idea to build a house for them. There's no real way to know what you can rely on them for until you've experimented a bit, but the best policy is to pay it forward with offerings, incense, and so on, to stay on their good side. The legend of the Jannah spirits of the Italian island of Sardinia, situated between Rome and Barcelona in the Tyrrhenian Sea, is illustrative of this point. Tiny dwellings have been carved into the cliffs of Sardinia, little caves equipped with all the furnishings of home, and dedicated to the Jannahs, the local spirits of the island. Like all spirits of place, they're apparently bored, I guess, and constantly mischievous unless appeased with gifts. It seems a bit extortionary, but then again, they were here first, and in the end, the arrival of humans drove them into hiding. The legend of the Jannahs goes, as all such legends do, that they were once physical beings that one could see arrayed in fair clothing and living in their little homes, and even struck deals with humans once we arrived on the scene, to be provided with food and drink and supplies occasionally in trade for their magical trinkets. Due to their dealings with humans, they no longer needed to labor in the sun and became creatures of the night instead, and very delicate in their form, so that they became dependent on humans. Since they now labored only in beautifying themselves, and only at night, they discovered magic that allowed them to weave the moonlight into their garments and trinkets. These items were so prized and valuable that a thief decided to rob them and made a bundle of money selling their treasures. The Jannah were too weak to stop him, and so the thief simply returned again and again until one day they disappeared, and no one has seen them since. The story tells a familiar tale. The original magical inhabitants of a place encounter humans, and they can get along at first, which weakens the magical creatures and changes their way of life. And then eventually other humans come along and disrupt the balance, causing the magical creatures of the world to go into hiding. The name Jannahs is an etymological descendant of Diana of the Greeks, Diana, Jannah, linking their nocturnal activities to the lunar goddess of wild animals and the hunt, or that is to say, the Neolithic ways of life, pre-agriculture. It's generally accepted that the introduction of agriculture allowed for systems of authoritarian control to develop in society, leading to the conquering tribal kings of the Bronze Age and the lineage of patriarchy that we've inherited today. The thief in this myth, which drives away the Jannahs, is representative of this tide of authoritarian violence reaching the shores of Sardinia and fundamentally changing their way of life. In ancient times, the island's inhabitants carved funeral grottos in the cliffs, the original of these Jannah houses, and the belief in Jannahs is a legacy of these ancient ancestral practices and lunar veneration, which would have been forced underground by the intrusion of various conquering empires. The loss of direct access to Jannahs due to the thief's actions represents the lesson of this story, that we must remember to propitiate spirits of place, to earn their trust and favor after so significant a betrayal. What are the Jannahs? Are they nature spirits, or the spirits of dead ancient peoples and cultures long gone? Well, it doesn't really matter, but I suppose you could ask them. Practically speaking, what matters is that they can be a nuisance or a boon, depending on how willing the locals are to engage with them respectfully. In wilder places, you have to contend with wilder spirits. To bridge the gap, investigating local practices is a great way to integrate yourself with place. It's a slow process, too, compared to what we're used to when picking out a new place to live in the West. There's a lot of steps, which is probably why Lecateau could fill 3 books with all of his findings. And Lecateau does provide an extremely comprehensive framework to build from, but you still have to fill in the details with the specific traditions of the area where you want to build and live. For us in our jungle context, the spirits which guard and inhabit the jungle are the Alush, short, hairy dwarves, or goblins, depending on who you ask, which inhabit the rocks and trees and care for the jungle. They have a habit of bringing disease and misfortune upon intrusive humans who do not show them respect, and at least pay symbolic respect to the jungle as well. It's an interesting situation to consider, sitting here in the wild, tropical Riviera Maya, famed for its beaches, jungles, cenotes, and sadly for its all-inclusive resorts. The resolution of that story I mentioned before about the overpass from the highway to the Cancun International Airport was that a substantial Alush house was built under the bridge. The construction still happened, obviously, as has the significant expansion of all the cities along the coastal highway, much to the distress of the local ecology, and yet the Alush seem satisfied to only mess with the specific developments which are foolish enough to violate their protocols. It's apparently not so much the domestication that they seem to have a problem with, but the lack of respect, and this tracks with the local stories about the Alush, and Fae in general, that I've encountered. In one Mayan legend, a farmer has been given a good life by the land, with plenty of corn and other food in his milpa, an ancient regenerative agriculture method that evolved in Central and South America. He has enough food that the birds and the animals can feed on the milpa, and he doesn't mind, until one day when he sees his whole harvest has been destroyed by animals, and he begins to hunt them. He continues until he drives away all of the animals, and then, upon entering into his eerily quiet fields, he is confronted by a little man who refers to himself as Alush, that forbids him from stepping foot into the fields or getting a harvest from the earth ever again in punishment for his lack of gratitude for the bounty that he had always been provided. The Alush asks the farmer why he has not kept up the offerings of saka, a ceremonial beverage made of sweet corn and honey, and why he does not burn the sacred copal incense any longer, and challenges the farmer to a battle to the death. The farmer is terrified because of the stories he's heard of how this Alush brings death and misfortune to others, but he finds an old man who teaches him how to defeat the Alush magically through trickery. Yet, even after wounding and driving away the Alush, who turns into a fox and runs out of the farmer's milpa, the farmer's land never again produces, just as the Alush foretold. The story is very potent in a place like the Yucatan, where forests were overlogged in the 20th century and whose rapid urbanization in the 21st century has dramatically changed its face completely. The jungle is beautiful, but it is no longer cultivated to support a thriving Maya empire of millions, and this land is increasingly used as scenery for tourism rather than the paradise of sprawling tropical food forests that it once was. I'm obviously of the mindset that the point of this parable is not that we're fucked and can't go back, but instead, I'm convinced that returning to the regenerative ways of the Mayan milpo will unlock a kind of abundance that we've forgotten is possible. But to do so requires reconstructing the old ways, practicing the old rituals, and making space for spirits. Reciprocity is the moral of this story. Reciprocity is the foundation for all relationships, including spiritual ones. And building a house for spirits is a way to demonstrate that you're paying it forward and putting the spirits first. It's helpful to try and see the situation from the perspective of the spirits, as difficult as that is, because particularly with nature spirits more than ancestors, the dead, or urban genus Loki, they are not excited about our presence. The arrival of humans to an area tends to upset the delicate natural balances that these beings prize and protect. To secure a safe place to build, particularly in wild places, it's necessary to work with the local spirits to secure a location to build on, permission to do so, and protection over your future home. This is a diplomatic endeavor, and it is therefore inevitably surrounded by compromise and protocol. And as with any diplomatic encounter, gifts and performative gestures are typical, necessary really, to avoid potential faux pas which turn into conflicts. And one of the most important protocols to observe in this process is the dedication of sacred space to the local spirits who collaborate with you. The process of acquiring the right to steward the land, permission to build on it, and protection over your structure and its inhabitants is an ancient one, and there are fairly well-defined protocols and customs for doing so. The customs change a little as you travel the world, obviously, but the pattern is what Lekoto lays out so thoroughly in the books that I mentioned. We've applied the methods that he describes so far with a great deal of success to enter into contract with the spirits of our jungle. Next, as we begin construction, upgrading our spirit allies with their first house is an essential part of starting our build off the right way. Alush houses can be very simple, like pillars of stacked rocks, or more complicated from huts to mini Mayan temple-looking constructions. Ours will probably fall somewhere in between, and may start as stacked rocks and evolve to something more permanent as I learn a little masonry during the build process. Unlike the contemporary local traditions that call for yearly offerings around Christmas time, which is unlikely to have persisted since ancient times, we have an active and ongoing practice of offerings and engage with these spirits on a regular basis. Thus far, when we've gone out to leave offerings for our jungle spirit friends, we've done so at a very old and very magical tree that grabbed our attention on the first visit where we actually made it onto the property. For well over a year now, we've been going out regularly with offerings to build and maintain this relationship. This tree sits near the eastern border of our lot, and there is sort of a glen, an open space under the canopy without a lot of other trees, that surrounds this tree in a semicircle extending to the west. I'm going to reserve that entire area for the spirits and wall it in with gardens to make it inaccessible to protect its wild status. And I'll put our Alush house right on the point where that semicircle would inscribe a square around it on the west side, and connect it to a meandering path that passes by its outer edge. This way the Alush house is accessible from the path, and typical offerings can go there, but no one will need to enter into the reserved bit of wild jungle without permission. This will allow us to make more of a permanent altar as well, with some candles and a surface for offerings and so on. And I'll probably put out the jars of jungle dirt that we collected along the way to purchasing our land and have been working with on our altar ever since. As usual, I'm flying a little blind because you can't exactly watch a YouTube video for this stuff yet, but that's also part of the fun. Experimentation, the fuck around and find out method, has served me very well because I approach the matter seriously and with genuine respect and appreciation. These spirits are our allies, and they have been good to us, and we look forward to continuing to develop this relationship as we build and move into our new home and make sanctuary in their jungle. As we settle into our new home, it's only right that they have a home to settle into as well. Thanks for tuning in to episode 18 of the Postmugglism podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode and it piqued your curiosity about spirit houses enough to make you consider building one for your own purposes. Reconstructing ancient practices so that we can move ourselves back into right relationship is an experimental process, and we can't really afford to worry about concerns like appropriation because we're really living here. We're taking land from these spirits either way, so this isn't a theoretical scenario. We have to learn how to coexist with the people of this place and its spirits. So we beg forgiveness for our ignorance when it offends, and otherwise we just try to show our gratitude, respect, and appreciation in whatever rituals we can either make up or reproduce. The kindness of our jungle spirits shows us that they appreciate our unrefined but authentic attempts at diplomacy and are rewarding us for that effort. In reality, so few people practice the old ways or actually even believe in spirits that our authenticity tends to be very well received. It wasn't immediate. Building relationships take time. But now that we have established this connection, it only makes sense to continue to demonstrate our appreciation by creating a home for the spirits as we create one for ourselves. After all, they're kind of like our extended family now. On the next show, I'll be celebrating the sun's ingress into its domicile in Leo with a deep dive into the role of the sun in health, vitality, identity, and drive, looking at the topic both from an astrological point of view and an energetic one, using the chakra system to apply celestial logic to personal healing and transformation. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. I put out new episodes every other week, and it's easy to miss one, but if you subscribe, you'll get notified each time that a new show gets published. And please, if you found value in this content, share it with a friend. This is really the only way that people can find new content these days. The algorithms have buried us so far under whatever propaganda they're pushing at a given moment that it's up to you, dear listener, to help this podcast find its audience and to help your friends find something new and uplifting to listen to. Beyond this podcast, I also create articles, videos, and other special content like my monthly Lunar Mansion Guide and more. And you can find all of that on my website at www.postmugglism.com. Go there and subscribe to my email newsletter in the sidebar, and then you'll get absolutely everything that I publish, regardless of what platform that it's on. Plus, you'll be the first to know about any new releases and any special discounts that I'm offering on our services at the Sacred Serpent, like the promotion that I'm currently running right now, where you can get 50% off of my energy healing and tarot reading services by using the coupon code FIRSTSESSION, all spelled out. You can take me up on that offer at www.sacredserpent.co if you're interested. Thanks for tuning in, sticking around, and hanging out. I'll be back in 2 weeks, and until then, take care, and may the gods be with you.